Welcome everyone to our June webinar. Happy Pride. Welcome to Belonging at Work, Practical Strategies for Inclusive Leaderships. Thank you so much for joining us. And if there's any scheduling conflicts that have come up this morning, not to worry. We'll be recording this and sending out a recording of this webinar out after, along with a follow-up blog post. And as always, if you miss any of our webinars or events, we always keep them housed on our website under the On the Airwaves section. So if you missed this, you can check that out there, as well as a lot of other great resources, videos, and past webinars. My name is Shelby Brown, and I'm the Director of Client Services here at the Roundtable. I'll be your host today, managing the chat and all things technical. For those of you who don't know us, we're the Roundtable, and we at the Roundtable are committed to making an impact. So as part of our own commitment to ongoing reconciliation, in January 2022, we partnered with an organization called Inspire. Inspire is a national Indigenous registered charity that invests in the education of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for the long-term benefit of these individuals, their families, and communities in Canada. The awful discovery of 215 Indigenous children buried in mass graves in Kamloops, BC in 2021 deeply affected us. So to honor the legacy of the Kamloops 215, we're striving to provide 215 university scholarships over the next 5 years. So as part of my own work as an ally, I'll now say a land acknowledgement for where I'm currently residing. So I respectfully acknowledge that in St. Catharines, we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. So before we start, just a few quick housekeeping items. As I mentioned, we're recording today's webinar. You'll receive a link following this, and we'll also release a summary blog post. And we really want to hear from you. So we've got the chat open, the Q&A open. I'll be monitoring that throughout the session. So don't be shy at any time to add your thoughts in there or questions. We love an interactive crowd. For those of you who are new to us, we're the Roundtable, and we've been around for almost 2 decades, 17 years, almost 18 years. So we're a company that helps leaders navigate change, disruption, and growth by building mindsets and behaviors that matter most. I'd now like to introduce you to Glyne Roberts-McCabe, Glyne like Shine. Glyne is the founder and president of the Roundtable and is a certified executive coach and has over 30 years experience leading teams in both private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. Glyne is the creator of several multi-award winning group coaching programs, including the Roundtable for Leaders, which some of you on this call are very familiar with, the Roundtable Catalyst, and the Roundtable High Performance Team Coach. And also, she's the author of not one but 2 best-selling books, The Grassroots Leadership Revolution, and Did I Really Sign Up for This? So Glyne, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Shelby. It's so great to be here. I love our community. You know, we started doing these really for the graduates of our community, and then we decided to expand the offerings, right, in terms of, bringing more and more guests into it. And, really for us at the Roundtable, we're all about building exceptional leaders that drive exceptional performance, that drive exceptional culture. That's really what we do. And for those of you who, are curious about some of the work we do, it kind of falls into 3 buckets. So group programs, team coaching programs, and individual coaching. So if you want more information on any of that, you can reach out to myself or any member of the team. I think we've got a few of our team members here in the group. But we are here to talk about inclusive leadership and belonging at work. So let's do it. Welcome. We've got 3 incredible panelists today. I'm just so thrilled that when I reached out to them, it was sort of the spontaneous idea I had. The world's kind of going a little bit bonkers. And I think, as leaders, we have an obligation to make everybody's voices feel heard and safe, and to continue to expand. Leadership is a journey of self-discovery. It's about knowing yourself and understanding the impact you have on other people, because leadership's a big responsibility. It's a privilege to be able to lead and coach and manage teams. And so today, we're under the umbrella of inclusion. It also happens to be Pride Month. I am wearing my Pride shirt today. And we are going to be here to kind of explore, what we mean by building a culture of belonging, what inclusive leadership means. We're going to look at, what tends to get in the way. What's the discomfort about? What do we as leaders maybe need to overcome within ourselves or support members of our team in overcoming? And just kind of get under the covers of some of the conversations that we don't feel comfortable having. Growth happens in your discomfort zone. And then look for some really practical strategies. Those of you who've been around us for a while know I'm big on practical application. Don't talk to me about theory and academic stuff. I want to know what can I go and do as soon as I walk out of this room that's going to make a difference and an impact. So the panelists have a wealth of knowledge in this area, and I know are excited to kind of share with you some insights and ideas. So again, my pronouns are she, her, and I am excited to be joined by Meg, Nirav, and Nicole. Again, if you know me, I don't do bios. I don't read bios. I don't love bios. What I love is having my panelists sort of introduce themselves. And what I've asked each of the panelists to do is to share who they are, where they are currently situated in terms of the world of work. And when they hear the word and they hear the term inclusive leadership, what comes to mind for them? So maybe I'll start with you, Nirav. I'm going to kick it off with you, and then we'll go to Nicole and then over to Meg. Oh, and you are muted. Here we are, 4 years into. There we go. Over to you, Nirav.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Nirav. My pronouns are he, him. I work for a company called Atura Power, and I'm very blessed to be working there because we are on a journey and we're sort of on our infancy. We're a small company that's a bit of a startup, and we started 5 years ago. And happy to chat a little bit about the DEI journey. But I think one of the questions was, what does inclusive leadership mean specifically to me? And what I would say it's more of a mindset for me, and it's how you deal with people, period. And instead of looking at a person and all that they make up, you look at what's their sort of individual makeup, what's their secret sauce, and being very respectful of that, feeling their strengths, seeing them as a whole person, what makes them tick. And being respectful of those differences and honoring the differences and fueling their strengths. So that's when trust happens. Things will bubble up. Truths get put on the table. And so out of your vulnerability and curiosity and your lens of looking at people just as individuals, I think that's really what inclusive leadership is. So happy to continue on with the chat with these very accomplished people on the panel today.
Love it. Okay, Nicole.
Right. Thanks so much. Hi, folks. My name is Nicole McVan. I'm the Vice President of Philanthropy and Marketing at United Way Greater Toronto. I have the best job and I work for the best organization. So sorry, everybody else on the panel. I have been in philanthropy and nonprofit work almost my entire career for about 25 years. And I absolutely adore the idea of getting to wake up in the morning and working hard for the greater good. And United Way is a place that through all of my travels, when I started working there, I realized I had come home to a place where I could show up as me, and I could do good work, and I can support other people to show up as themselves. And so when I think about inclusive leadership, I actually think about my work with United Way. And I'll maybe talk about this a little bit later, but I often think about, for me, inclusive leadership is about vulnerability and creating an opportunity for people to be themselves at work, but also recognize what work is, and that it's not this. It's not a piece, it's not to replace family. It is a job, it is work. But what we can do as leaders is to create a space for people to enjoy it, to feel like they belong, and to feel like they're respected. And so, yeah, I'll pause there, but I'm so thrilled to be on the panel with all of you.
Love it. Thanks, Nicole. All right, Meg.
Yeah, right on. Thank you. Very happy to be here with all you folks. I'm Meg Mathis. I use she, her pronouns. I I like to share my pronouns because I'm a transgender woman, and I want people to know how to address me respectfully. So I want to create space for others also to be able to share their pronouns if they wish. So that's why I share them. Yeah, I hold multiple credentials in the skilled trades and in leadership. I've been in the skilled trade space for about 3 decades, and the last 3 years of my career, I actually took a turn into human resources and worked directly in DEI. And in the backlash and against DEI that's occurring, I thought I would start Equimeg Consulting as a side hustle, and Equimeg Idea Consulting, that's inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, is here just to try and help stand up for what is right and to help organizations and folks move forward in this space. So, inclusive leadership. Well, I really reflected on this, and I think it's the same leadership that we're already talking about. The only difference is, we're asking you to look in places that feel uncomfortable, places of privilege, places of power, and places of identity. So I think it's the exact same thing. And as leaders, we're asking you to be professional, respectful, and curious. So if you're not willing to ask questions in those places, you're not leading inclusively.
Love that. Okay, so there's the platform for us today. And I love Anne's comment in the chat. We as leaders need to build awareness on inclusivity to ensure mental health, well-being, and psychological safety. We're going to get into some of those topics as we go forward. But, Meg, you mentioned the backlash against DEI that's happening, particularly south of the border. I was really encouraged. I was at a conference actually where I met you, and Nirav was there for the energy sector. And it was really great to hear how many Canadian companies are actually going the opposite direction. They're really doubling down and, really standing up to it. But let's talk about what people get wrong about DEI. And, I think some of the backlash, and I think, for me, I think there's a lot of white males that feel very sort of put upon and marginalized and alienated in some of the rhetoric, I suppose, around DEI and what it means. And so I'd love to sort of look at that a little bit. Narab, I'd like to start with you. What can you sort of give us a perspective on why DEI is actually good for business, why we need to look at diversity from through the business lens? And then Meg, I'll ask you what we often get wrong on this concept of equity and the perspective. So Nirav, let's start with you.
So I think there's many HR professionals on the call and
Mhm.
scratching their heads, sort of saying, how do I keep this alive in my organization? How do I keep maybe the flames aren't there, but certainly the embers are. And I think as HR and leaders, we're supposed to sort of fan that time or fan those embers a little bit because I think brighter days are coming and they will. But one of the things that we have to look at is what are our business imperatives? And that's always that link, right? How do you make a business case for diversity? And what I would say is think about innovation. As a country, we have to double down on becoming more resilient as an economy, looking within our borders, solving for a lot of really big business challenges, frankly, around economy, retaining our workers, and growing our economy. And all of that will require one thing, different perspective. And so I think as leaders and HR professionals, we really need to keep that. How do you build an A team? And how do you have that secret sauce for success? Well, a lot of it, and the research will show, and all of us can go into the research and put our decks together. But really, it's around if you want to have an A team, you need to have different perspective and you need to have lots of creative minds together. So, as we double down on some big challenges for our economy, I think we have to look at our workforce and say, how do we make sure that we future-proof our workforce? And a lot of that comes down with getting smart people with different perspectives into roles. And so that's one of the things that I would take a look at is, when you look at resiliency and creative thinking and innovation, those are the things that we're really going to need to drive our economy. And how does that translate to a talent strategy? And how can you infuse those things even without being very intentional about it, so that it makes sense to people, and convincing is not as much of a challenge. So that's what I'd like to offer.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, in all the work that we do a lot of work with teams, and Nicole's actually experienced that with their team where, we have a tool that we use where people can see the tensions that can exist within different energy biases that we have. And I found like in doing that work with individuals and even my own marriage, I don't know if my husband's on this call, but anyway, knowing where we have our tensions is that actually the strength is where we can come together in the middle often. It's often where that's the power. And so if you can take that friction and turn it into the positive as opposed to going down the negative, that's truly where we get this really breakthrough thinking and different ways of looking at situations and better outcomes and results, I think. But going back to, we've got to be curious, we've got to be humble and vulnerable, I think, Meg, to what you said. So Meg, love to kind of like pivot the question just a bit to
Hmm.
talk a little bit about like, what do we get wrong? And particularly by this word equity, I think that's often a big hot button, and how can we bring more allies in and people who are, let's face it, in the power seats around this,
Yeah.
love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think people oftentimes misunderstand equity and equality. So just for everyone's, awareness or understanding, equality is about everyone getting the same thing. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Oh, Oprah Winfrey it. But equity is about giving folks what they need to be able to thrive. It's about giving them what they need. So I think people often believe it to be special treatment, but equity is simply just a redistribution of assets to me. And often those assets cost nothing. So I think we have a lot of business professionals or aspiring business professionals on this call as well. And if you have to make some business decisions, you only have so many assets that you can move around. So it's about how you distribute those assets. But you also have to understand that some of these assets cost nothing. Kindness, visibility, mentorship, the chance to be seen and heard, offering this to other folks costs you nothing. And that's something that can be shared broadly. So I love that there was white males brought into this question, because I have two sons, 25 and 26, and they are both young white men. And even they are wondering, what does fairness look like for us? And it's not just about including white men, but it does also include them along with everyone else. We all carry bias. I can't remember the stat, but we have a 1 in 400 and something thousand chance of not being biased. Like it is just inherent. It is the way we are all wired. I do it. Um, so it I think the bias often stops us from asking the right questions. And inclusion isn't about breaking anyone, it's about bending. And there's a saying I really love, that's out and around, and there's pictures for it, and it goes, equal rights for others does not mean fewer rights for you. It's not pie. And it's saying that it's equal rights for others. It's about giving them opportunity and stuff. But that goes against what I said earlier about how um it's not pie, but I'm saying it's a redistribution of assets. But I think what they're talking about there is that opportunity, those things that cost nothing that are free.
Mhm.
But so equity is still a redistribution, but it just asks us to share space, to share visibility and opportunity. And I think it's really important to double down on this. And this is something that a lot of people get wrong and they go to first when they talk about DEI. It is still about choosing the very best person for the job. We need the best people in the right seats doing the right jobs, but be intentional about how you define best and whether your lens is wide enough,
Mhm.
because we have to consider not just what we're familiar with, but all these other diverse thoughts and perspectives like Narav just said.
Mhm. And I think, and I think this is where bias is really tricky, right? I have a friend, she says, if you have a brain, you have a bias. If you have a brain,
Yes.
you have a bias,
It
right? So when we
consumes
start,
80% of our oxygen or whatever. Like
yeah,
it's that thing is amazing, but it
yeah. So
takes shortcuts.
if you're looking at talent through the lens of your bias, and you see it in small ways. You must have this experience before you can do this job because I had that experience and I know that's what got me to my job, right? And then you start layering this in, when we start thinking about what it takes. I think the bias around, men need to earn more than women because they're the breadwinners. Like there's just so many of these inherent biases in all kinds of places. And yeah, that's the thing as leaders, right? Is how do we start to broaden our lens, as you said so beautifully, right? What do we need to do, and who can we surround ourselves with that can really help with that, right? Because I think sometimes you can't get outside of yourself, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes,
Hmm.
which is where these conversations become so helpful. So, to keep kind of going around, and this came up in the comments around, the importance of things like psychological safety to create this space to allow people to be curious, to allow people to maybe ask the questions that they don't feel comfortable asking. Psychological safety has been a buzzword. It's become a bit of a buzzword for a while. It really kind of gained a lot of popularity with Amy Edmonds and her work, and Project Aristotle, which was the work of Google, to see, teams that perform better had high psychological safety, which, if you're not familiar with the term, is really, in the most simplest sense, it's like, I know that the people on my team have my back, right? I feel that I can make the mistake. They're going to have my back. I'm not going to be kind of isolated. I can take some risks, and I'm going to be supported around that. And I feel safe, right? So, Nicole, what really struck me when I started working with you is you have such a great, you've created so much of that within your own team. And I'd love you to share, is that, I guess I'm curious, like, is that just something that's inherently within you? Or were there some very intentional things that you've done along the way to create this really beautiful container that you've created?
Hmm. Um, I think there's inherent goodness and beauty and leadership in all of us. But I think we all come to leadership through our own personal and professional journeys. And um, I came out as queer at 35 and transgender non-binary at 40. So I'm late to the party, but also because of that, have so much experience in different identities in the world.
Mm,
And as I came out, I became a much better leader.
mm,
I would not be half as good as I am today if I was not queer. And I know that deep in my bones. Um, and I want others to know that, um, because we often hide parts of our identity. And there's
mm,
absolutely terrific reasons, for us to hide invisible parts of our identity. But it's also about if you can create spaces for people to be a little bit more themselves, you open up so much opportunity. And Narav, you talked about that. Like that is inclusive leadership. And one of the poems that I read a few years ago really helped me think about psychological safety in a different way. We often talk about safe spaces, and this poem's called An Invitation to Brave Space, and it's by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. And I can put the link in when I stop talking. But I'll just read you the first few lines because it reshaped my thinking on this and really helped me as a leader. It says, "Together we will create brave space because there's no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we all have caused wounds. In this space we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world." And it goes on a bit further, but essentially the idea of brave space is now common conversation on my team, is that there's no such thing as safety. We're all going to cause harm. Every single one of us will. But we can create a space for more bravery. And bravery means calling people in when they make a mistake. I'm often misgendered. Happens all the time. I do it to myself sometimes. Um, it's okay. Like let's name it and let's move on. And so psychological safety is about creating the space where we give each other grace to make mistakes, and we hold each other accountable. And those two things must work hand in hand if you want to create that.
I love that. We were just, we've been working on a big topic for a lot of our clients is accountability. And one of the concepts that we were talking about around psychological safety is, you don't want to inflict harm, intentional harm on people. But one of the things we have to get comfortable with is discomfort. And a lot of people are not comfortable with discomfort. So I love what you just said about that. Um, I think, Narav, as you look at it from the perspective as like through an organizational lens, what then you, as you mentioned earlier, we've got a number of HR leaders and coaches that support organizations on the team. What are some of the things that you think we need to be thinking about as we foster a culture of psychological safety more broadly?
Sure. I love this comment, Nicole, about brave space, and I think I'm going to steal that from you and look up
Yeah.
this poem because I'd love to share that even for an ED&I moment. I think for me, I'm in the electricity industry, so I will use a lot of analogies, and we use the one of a battery. So if your battery's on full charge, it means you are a rock star. You are knocking it out of the park. You are feeling comfortable to put your ideas out there. And I look at, for me even, I came out very late in life in the corporate world at 40. And I felt my battery wasn't fully charged. And it took one of the, I went to the round table and there was a very specific module on branding line. And it really prompted me to say, what kind of leader am I if I'm hiding a good chunk of myself at work and always trying to figure out how I can be more straight or fit in with the crowd that I felt was sort of the path to success and that kind of thing. And I felt, when you just focus on being yourself, that sort of fills up that space in the battery that you're using with sort of negative energy or unproductive sort of tasks to sort of get through the day. And I think a lot of it has to do with leadership branding. So in a time where, let's face it, funding is decreasing in things that I think most of us on this call hold near and dear to our heart. Programs are sort of being curtailed, wrapped up, and we see a shift. I think a lot of it has to be turn the mirror to yourself. As leaders, we've still got the same thoughts, we've still got the same motivations, we've still got the same types of employees that we have in our organizations. And the one question that I would encourage everybody to start asking, and it was something that I pretty much figured out through some conversations with my own friends, is just asking people, what does community in the workplace mean to you today? And I was quite surprised when I started asking that question of some random employees at our organization, what I learned. And some of it was very simple in terms of even symbolic things. And someone said, the fact that there were leaders in our company that, we had these pride stickers. I didn't really think anything about them. We ordered them last year and people started slapping them on their laptops. They were out with all this other stuff that we had, pride flags for our pride raising. And a new employee said, what builds community, Narav? It's really simple. I saw some people with those stickers, not everybody, but it just felt like I had an ally in the workplace, or that there's a lot of people here that, I can share with, and it wouldn't be so awkward. And so I really started doubling down on this, and I'm so glad that a friend of mine asked, said that that's a good coaching question you should ask, Narav, because you can't presuppose, as HR people often do, what employees need or how to advocate for them without asking. So it's about your brand. If you're asking, I'm curious about this. I ran into a situation where I was uncomfortable about meeting a friend who likely had family in Israel, and they were probably experiencing some angst about the Israel-Iran conflict. I met them for a concert, and I very hesitantly brought this topic up, probably within 20 minutes of meeting. And he said, Narav, I'm so glad you did, because he goes, I could tell that you're very Canadian and you're very hesitant to bring it up. But the fact that you wouldn't bring it up would actually be more hurtful to me. So I know you don't want to get into the politics of it, but to say, hey, you've got family in Israel. How are you holding up? Or, just to invite them to share a little bit. So I think for us, this area around discomfort, we just need to be curious and we just need to ask and maybe approach it with intent. I'm not sure if I should raise this, but I felt I should acknowledge this because I care for you. And it shows that you are, someone that cares for their whole being, not just their work self, or not just, a connection that you have with them, that you care for them as a whole person. So those are the things that I would encourage. How do I create? What does good community workplace look like to you? Help us define that.
Mm. And it's simple things. Like I love the simplicity of, just asking the question, putting on a sticker. Like, I mean, these are, I think sometimes we create, like we make things bigger than they actually need to be.
Yeah.
It's often these micro actions and small steps that we can take, right? And so we get stalled because we think it has to be some big grand scheme. So, folks, as we're going along here, please put your questions into the chat for this group. I know they're keen to kind of, really help. Like, if you've got a specific thing you're curious about or want to get some perspective on, we're here for you. This is for you. I'm going to keep going with the questions we have, but start throwing them in there or in the Q&A. Both work. So let's kind of segue into that. We sort of, this sort of traps and pitfalls and what sort of stalls us out. Why don't we, do what you did, Narav, have that brave conversation, put it out there. And I think this whole concept about harm and we're going to harm people, I think sometimes that's actually the big fear. It's the unintentionality that we created harm to somebody. I know, Nicole, you and I working together, sometimes I catch the they and sometimes I don't. And it's the internal, like, oh, I did it wrong, and you start beating yourself up because you didn't do it perfectly and you didn't do it right. And I think that, that's some of the stuff that we as individuals have to kind of move beyond and get over. Meg, I think when I heard you speak, I was so, I was so moved, but also, I don't know, I found your story so compelling about what you went through when you, made your transition in the workplace and sort of how, the big shift that you experienced. But I'd love you to kind of share, how do what did you learn from that experience and what are the ways that, people just unintentionally create this harm?
Yeah. I am a self-proclaimed nerd, and I obsessed and project managed over my transition. Much like my friend Nicole here, I came out a little bit later in life. I was 41 when I decided to publicly and professionally transition. And when I came out as a transgender woman, everything shifted. And I don't just mean my identity. Um, but I wasn't necessarily shouted down at or insulted directly, but suddenly, things started to change, and I planned my message to go out on a Friday, first thing in the morning, so I could have the Friday to kind of have discussions with people and have IT work through some stuff and all that. And then I came to work Monday as Meg. And the very first meeting of the day was with a group of peers, and immediately things changed. I was spoken over when before I had a voice. I was left out of conversations. They stopped asking my perspective. They treated me like I had to re-earn the trust that I've already proven with them. And it was just so shocking for me, and I was like literally watching the threads of my male privilege evaporate as my identity was becoming visible. And these were not big acts of harm, like we talk about micro things, and that's all oftentimes what it is it's the very small things, but the small things add up. And like microaggressions, we say it's like death by a thousand paper cuts. Well, these were very small, like absences. I was being avoided in the hallway. People would deliberately not walk past my desk or look the other way as they did. Like they just didn't know how to call this stuff out. And so I called that micro exclusions. And micro exclusions is how trust dies by 1,000 cuts. So here's a tool that you can take with yourself. Maybe ask yourself, who have I never said hi to? Who's that person that I see every single morning as we walk into the building at the same time, and I always avoid them? you know and I'm not telling you to, if you're very busy, to reach out to the person who's extremely chatty and stuff like that, and you're gonna get caught up for an hour in a conversation, but just trying to reach out a little bit more. But I think that's really where inclusion starts. It's about awareness. It's with noticing. Like, I think if we had a tally counter, the amount of times we've said "be curious" today, like, it really starts there, and doing something that's different. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
good ideas. Nicole, I'd love you to build on this.
Yeah.
Your experience and what would you say
Yeah.
you would share as learnings for people?
So Meg, thank you for sharing that. That's a really vulnerable thing to share. Um, and I appreciate that. And I'm smiling because I had the opposite happen to me. I came out as non-binary, more masculine, and all of a sudden my voice had more power. And I was like, what the hell? You've never listened to me when I was a woman. Um,
Oh boy.
it's wild, right? Misogyny is wild, and it's one we often don't talk as much about, over like race, transgender, accessibility. But it's such an ingrained piece. And so I just appreciate you sharing that, because that is something that I think even the most active ally would catch themselves at. So that's wonderful to name it, right? That's the first step. Um, One thing that I think a lot about is zoom in, zoom out. And actually, in this case, I think zoom out, zoom in. And so, as you think about what you can do as a leader or an HR professional, is do you understand the system we are working in, the system we are living in? Do you understand that meritocracy is a myth? Do you understand that all wealth in this country, in this no, continent, has been built on colonization, racism, misogyny, discrimination? And if that feels uncomfortable, that's okay. Go learn more about it. We can't change what our ancestors have done, and I'm speaking as a white person here, but I can change the way I show up. And one of the ways that I need to show up, also self-proclaimed nerd, is to know my history so that I don't repeat it. And then you can look for these little acts. And so one thing that comes to up for me a lot is power dynamics. So why are like power dynamics are definitely one to one, one to few, but they're built on the system that is built unfair. This system is working exactly as it intended, as it's intended to work, and we have to understand that. And so you have to be a little bit of a class trader, a gender trader. You have to be a disruptor. And it doesn't mean you have to hold up a picket sign on the street or get arrested, but it does mean things like you got to say hello to the folks who don't get talked to. It does mean you got to think about putting your pronouns in your signature, even if you're cisgender. It does mean some of these little things, because after you zoom out and start to understand the system you're operating in, zoom in to the relationships you're building or not building. And every act you do in a relationship builds or detracts from trust. And that can kind of feel overwhelming. When I say it, actually, I'm overwhelmed by myself now. I think I'm going to go lay down. But it's just muscle. So it's just muscle. All you need to do is build it. Start with something, build on it, build on it. And then I think what I have seen happen in myself and others is, as you get a consistent practice, you then can expand wider and wider, and it just becomes a bit more second nature. It's not that you won't have bias or you won't make mistakes. I do all the time, but that it just becomes who you are. And also, like to Narav's point, it becomes how you're known. And you often have more power than you know in an organization. And so people are watching you. And so you want to be known as a person that is safe and inclusive and all of those things. And that starts with just those little things.
That's so good. So good. And I think, I'd love to sort of dig a little bit into what I see with leaders. I think, and thinking about myself, and thinking about, there's many situations where we're uncomfortable. We don't want to make a misstep, and a lot of that has to do with like, what's your own wiring, what's your own bias, where are you coming from in your view of this? I think the other thing I see too is I see a lot of it's almost like a defensive reaction, like, oh, this is getting so politically correct. What can't you say? We had a really great discussion in our pre-call around the use of the language blind spot, right, as being ableistic. And in our organization, we used to have the term master coach, and then that was problematic, right? In terms of language. And I think what I see from a lot of people is like almost like I don't even know what to say anymore. So I'm just not going to say anything. I'm just gonna shut up. And I think there's a lot of I have somebody who I know very well who's a very open-minded person, and probably I always joke that he's more of a feminist than I am, but really struggles with the thought of having to put pronouns behind my name. Why do I have to do that? Why am I being told that I have to do that? And why do I have to? And I'm not privileged. I didn't grow up privileged. I had to scrap everything. And so I would love to kind of hear from all three of you, you know, if you're somebody who's maybe had those thoughts, like how can you move beyond it? I think we've talked a little bit about that, but any other sort of thoughts around that? And then if you have somebody that you work with, or that you're coaching, or that's in your life, like this individual is in my life, strategies for helping opening up the mindset a little bit. Would love to kind of hear thoughts on that. So who'd like to kick us off on this one?
I can go.
Awesome. Thanks, Meg.
Okay. I agree with you. I think that leaders often avoid these conversations out of fear, fear of getting it wrong, saying the wrong thing, or being judged for it. You're absolutely right. But, discomfort isn't a stop sign. It's a signal that you have an opportunity to grow. And we like being comfortable, and it's uncomfortable to grow.
Mhm.
I have a friend, Kirsten. She runs Terra Firma Transition Consulting. She'll help folks and organizations with transitions in the workplace and stuff, gender transitions. And she taught me about this AIM model. So it's acknowledge, improve, and move on. Don't belabor
Mhm.
things. Like your fear of getting it wrong. Get over it. It's easy. Like acknowledge. I'm sorry, Nicole. I messed up your pronouns. I am going to commit to improve, and I'm going to move on. When I came out, uh, and started sharing my name and pronouns more prevalently, the people who adapted the quickest were the ones who made it part of everyday conversation. I was chatting with Meg the other day. She was telling me how she has two adult sons. She told me that her spouse, Becca, and her love to go camping. Meg and Becca go camping all summer long. So what did I learn out of that? Well, I learned that her name is Meg. I learned that her pronouns are she and her because I heard them over and over again. I learned that she has a spouse, and her spouse's name is Becca, and her spouse, Becca, also uses she, her pronouns. So, like, actively listening and leaning in, getting curious, we can learn all kinds of things about people. But the folks who had the easiest time just said it lots, like
Mhm.
obsessively said my name and pronouns in conversation, and they got it right. So they didn't make it awkward, they just made it normal. And I think that's how we build belonging. It's not about perfection, it's about practice. How many times
Mhm.
in our leadership worlds and other job roles do we screw up and make mistakes? I do it, like let's be honest about it. We all do it.
Yeah.
That's how we grow. And so it's the exact same thing in this situation.
Mhm.
I
Good.
think if I could jump in here for one sec, I think the other thing is you don't know what you don't know, and
Oh.
often you need an expert or you need somebody with a different perspective who will challenge your bias. So one of the
Hmm.
things that I encourage people to consider is doing some kind of HR culture or equity audit. And we did one of these. And while we had some mixed results, I think it uncovered some very simple things that I was frankly embarrassed that we didn't do already. One example was this consultant looked at our interview guides and said, the first question you should ask is, what are your pronouns that you would like to be referred to as? Welcome to the interview. Like we'll just, we had all the best practices of like,
Mm.
we're going to slow down and blah, 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 blah. We'll ask the questions, but that was a simple thing. And I was a little embarrassed, to be honest, thinking I'm a DEI professional or I espouse to this type of work. And why didn't I think of that? Some of the stuff is very cost effective. And in this space, you may want to just look at your own internal policies, right? If you're looking at inclusion, start with your own internal policies and maybe have some people. You don't have to hire a consultant. Maybe you just have some people on your diversity committee tasked with some of this to say, what lens should we be looking at? And that might spur some conversations around the importance of pronouns, for example, or I don't know why we have to be so sensitive around this, and it may create some very grassroots type conversations around your workplace. But having someone do that type of systematic sort of review of how you hire and all of that will be quite indicative. I guarantee you, it was an eye-opening experience for our organization when we did that.
Mhm.
Great. Nicole?
I'll just jump in on this, coming back to your story, Glenn, about a man who's a feminist who's having trouble with pronouns and feeling
Mm.
that fatigue. And I think none of us are spring chickens on this call. I think we all feel some fatigue in some way. Again, the system makes us fatigued.
Yeah.
So this is actually not an accident or an individual issue. This is
Mhm.
actually the system causing us to be exhausted so that we don't rise up and do good things. It's fully
Love
the
that.
system. So again, like let's not ascribe individual fatigue to a failing of ourselves. So that's one thing. The second thing is like if you have a conversation with someone that you know is actively mostly an ally and mostly trying to do good work, it's validating their fatigue. I understand that it's hard to keep learning and to keep changing. I totally get that. And pronouns are not just about they, them, she, her, he, him. Pronouns about is do if you actively don't use my right pronoun, you're telling me you actively don't respect me and you possibly hate me for existing. And that's fairly dramatic, but on a regular basis, I am dehumanized all the time. That's exhausting. And so the very least I would like from people around me is to try to not dehumanize me, to try to say to me through their actions and words that they see me as a valid human. That's it. That's all I want. And I think my question to a cisgendered man is how many times have your identity been invalidated? How many times have you not been seen as a guy?
Mhm.
And and that could be enough in somebody who's just trying to understand. Um, and when you put it like that, then there's often a lot of like, oh shit, I'm sorry, or guilt. And it's not, I don't, guilt does nothing for us. And so back to Meg's point on aim, acknowledge, what was it? Acknowledge,
Improve and move on.
just move on. It's fine.
Don't
It's fine,
belabor it.
right? And often, when you're accustomed to privilege, um, accountability feels like oppression.
Mm. Okay, say that again.
When you're accustomed to privilege, accountability can feel like oppression. And we are all accustomed to privileged in various types of our identity. And so, therefore, accountability on those identity types we don't often reflect on feels very oppressive. And that's where the defensive nature comes from.
Huge, huge. My brain is going in 50 million different directions. Seriously. Okay, so one of the things that I'm so fascinated to watch unfold is Gen Z coming into the workplace. I've got a 21-year-old Gen Z daughter, and I'm thinking if she was on this call, she'd be probably going, why are you people even talking about this? Get over it. Start like a totally different perspective than when I was her age at 21. How do you think this is going to sort of, change our workplaces? Nicole, what are you seeing as you're sort of meeting these people and hiring them in? And Rav, is there any things that you're noticing as you're recruiting this next cohort of employees around what they're expecting and what they consider to be the responsibilities of managers and organizations?
Mm-hmm. I love intergenerational conversation. So I'm 45, so I'm ex-millennial cusper. Um, and I love the challenge of working two generations away from myself. And often let's think about that too, because we know ourselves and we know the next proximity. And I find the Gen Z conversation is probably the exact same conversation that our predecessors had in the early 80s about us.
Totally.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of this, like the famous Martin Luther King quote, which is like the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that quote is about many, many things. It's about humans' ability to bend it. It's also about having patience that this is a marathon and a life's worth of work. And so as your 21-year-old daughter is coming to the workforce, she is X number of years ahead of you on this arc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as older people, we have to acknowledge and validate their experience and take that criticism as an opportunity to continue to grow. So back to Narav's point, what question would you ask the 21-year-old employee is what does community in the workforce mean to you? And start learning about what community means for 21 to 25-year-olds and reflect on how that's different from 41 to 45-year-olds or 61 to 65-year-olds. And don't put judgment on it, just acknowledge it. And there's something I'm not super familiar with it. You as HR professionals might be, but this idea of reverse mentoring. And I've heard it a few times now, and I know some people who have done it, and I think I do it a bit informally, but like, how does it show up? How do you learn from folks in their 20s? Instead of you just thinking that you need to mentor folks in their 20s?
Great question, Narav. What do you want to
I've
say to
got
this?
two such smart people on this panel. I feel like I'm taking notes while I'm actually on this panel. So thank you, Nicole and Meg, for educating me as well. One of the things, I'm accountable for employee communications, and I've never had that function up until very recently. And what I've also learned is our recruitment and branding strategies have to evolve with where we're at in terms of the new generation we're recruiting. And so I had a student actually give me some feedback saying, your website is very corporate and it is very focused on electricity generation and the excitement around that. But you haven't really talked about what it's like to work here, Narav. And I thought, probably a mistake on my part. And so, I said, what do you think? And he said, well, remember that, and I can't remember what event it was. It was some event where we took some pictures, and he said, like, even talking about that, and I even thought like that was not a lot of fanfare. I mean, the pictures were kind of just done on an iPhone, but he said, try, advertising stuff like that is what some of my peers would care about in terms of
Mm.
thinking of why to join an organization. And again, the connection. And then the other thing I heard from a recruitment perspective is your onboarding system needs to reflect the generations at work. And we have to remember some people have not been in an office environment, for example, for the first time because of hybrid and this and that. We called some people back and it's like, you know what? I haven't really hung out in an office before. This is like my first or second job as a new grad, for example. And often even we take for granted etiquette that we just pick up. And sometimes you don't get that with a younger generation. So gauge your audience in terms of what their learning and development goals are. That was the big aha for me recently. And what are your communication strategies? Because you have to have some different channels. Like, everybody says, well, we don't need posters. Well, sometimes posters do work because there is an age group that says, I look at them and I find that's what catches my attention. I'm missing the emails or the Slack chat or all of the different avenues that people communicate different messages. So gauge your audience with different generations at work and really ask your employees about some things that you need to change. Even asking people about what the website should look like. Few different people from different walks of life in your workplace will probably give you a lot more insight than just a few HR people around the table because they don't have that perspective. So
Constantly evolving. Well, I'm blown away at the time. So we're gonna have to wrap it up, and we're gonna wrap it up by I want each of you to give one small shift or habit that a leader can do to kind of help people feel more included and valued and accepted. I'm going to use Anne's word, accepted. One small thing. Meg, what do you got?
It's just what we've been saying here today. Keep asking questions. It's the small things. Get curious or be curious and get uncomfortable.
Love it. Narav.
set some goals with your leaders, even if they're small, that are appropriate with the times and advance the needle as much as you can.
Beautiful. Nicole.
Reading about mountains does not make you a mountaineer. Take some action, take a step, and track the step. And what you'll see is in a year from now, instead of doing one thing a day, you end up doing 10 things a day.
Love it. Thank you all so much. This has been probably one of my favorite panels of all time. I appreciate you all, the candor, the vulnerability, the stories, the real life examples, and the strategies. It was excellent. So Shelby, over to you to take us home.
Oh,
There's Shelby. You there?
I'm here. Sorry. My computer was a bit delayed there.
She was
Alrighty.
busy taking notes.
Yes. So thank you again, Narav, Nicole, and Meg. And just a few little roundtable announcements. The Roundtable Academy. So this is a great group program. It's ideal for organizations who already have a strong leadership development program in place, who are looking to support their high performing mid-career leaders. If you have any questions or interested in the Roundtable Academy, feel free to send me an email and we'd be happy to share more about that and get you all set up on the Roundtable Academy.
And I'm going to remind everybody, we've got a team coaching micro course. If you want to do some work with your team, you can do a self-directed course, or you can do what Nicole's actually doing with her team. We can do a set of programs with you on different topics. So that's the next slide, Shelby. So just let us know if you want to maybe have some team accelerator sessions to work together and just deepen your impact as a collective group. I think the future of leadership learning is actually in teams. That is where the future is going because of the complexity. So don't wait to get on board, and you can create your own safe, brave spaces, as we've talked about today, to unpack learning and learn together and grow together. So reach out to me or info at, and we can chat with you about what you're working with. So thank you, everyone. We are going to be taking a break over the summer with our series, but we will be back in the fall. If you've got suggestions of topics and ideas, please do shoot them our way. And we'll have the recording and everything going out to you next week. So thanks, everyone. Great to have you here, and enjoy the rest of your week. And happy Pride to all of the folks on the call that are celebrating this month.